Anger seems to be, well, quite the issue these days. I mean, it's always been a problem, but to me it seems that anger is more prevalent and pervasive these days. An angry world, angry groups, angry workplaces, angry homes, angry people, anger everywhere you turn. Sometimes we euphemistically call it drama, as if our acting out in anger is part of a play or something, and when the scene's over, we can just walk off and say, hey, that's done. No lingering effects, no long-term consequences, when actually that is so far from the truth that it's actually laughable. Way too often, anger builds up until it boils over, and then maybe you overreact and things get a little messy. Okay, sometimes they get a lot messy. And I know because I've been there, when you first overreact, sometimes it might feel kind of good, right? Because things have been building up, and you are so tired of it. You are so tired of it, and you're so tired of having to deal with it, and so tired of seemingly being ignored that when you yell and give them a piece of your mind, it feels good, like you're blowing off steam. But later there's almost always regret, like, well, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? That's not me. I feel bad. Or there's fallout, like some sort of a mess to deal with. And sometimes there's both regret and fallout. And some of those messes aren't very easily cleaned up. Some of those incidents aren't very easily forgotten. Some of those consequences over all that overreaction can last a really long time. Is any of that good? Or is there a better way? What can we do about something like the anger and accompanying overreaction that seems so pervasive everywhere we turn? Well, this next scene in Joseph's story, it shows us what not to do. I mean, you might recall the backstory, that Dad favored Joseph more than all the other brothers, and he wasn't subtle about it at all. Joseph rubbed that in his brothers' faces. Best case scenario, he's clueless. Worst case scenario, he's a spoiled brat. Well, the brothers are getting really mad at Jacob for all of that. They're banking their bitterness, they're harboring their resentment, they're letting their anger stew. They're not doing anything overt to Joseph other than giving him the cold shoulder and saying mean things to him, probably because Dad was around to protect his favorite son. But as they're keeping that anger and resentment in, letting it seethe and build and stew, they're probably thinking about what they might do to Joseph if they got the chance, and then they get their chance, which is where the next part of the story picks up. Genesis chapter 37, starting at verse 12. Listen.
His brothers had gone to take care of their father's flocks at Shechem. Israel then said to Joseph, "Your brothers are taking care of the flocks at Shechem. I'm going to send you to them." Joseph responded, "I'll go." So Israel said, "See how your brothers in the flocks are doing, and bring some news back to me." Then he sent Joseph away from the Hebron valley. When Joseph came to Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the open country. "What are you looking for?" the man asked. Joseph replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they're taking care of their flocks." The man said, "They moved on from here. I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance. Before he reached him, they plotted to kill him. They said to each other, "Look, here comes that master dreamer. Let's kill him. Throw him into one of the cisterns and say that a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what happens to his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to save Joseph from their plot. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Let's not have any bloodshed. Put him into that cistern that's out in the desert, but don't hurt him. Reuben wanted to rescue Joseph from them and bring him back to his father. So when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his special robe with long sleeves. Then they took him and put him into an empty cistern. It had no water in it. As they sat down to eat, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying the materials for cosmetics, medicine, and embalming. They were on their way to take them to Egypt. Judah asked his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother and covering up his death? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's not hurt him because he's our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. As the Midianite merchants were passing by, the brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern. They sold him to the Ishmaelites for 8 ounces of silver. The Ishmaelites took him to Egypt. When Reuben came back to the cistern and saw that Joseph was no longer there, he tore his clothes in grief. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. What am I going to do?" So they took Joseph's robe, killed a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. Then they brought the special robe with long sleeves to their father and said, "We found this. You better examine it to see whether it's your son's robe or not." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. A wild animal has eaten him. Joseph must have been torn to pieces." Then to show his grief, Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son a long time. All his other sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, "No, I will mourn my son until I die." This is how Joseph's father cried over him. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Midianites sold Joseph to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials and captain of the guard.
So Joseph is wearing that special robe again. And it's not exactly an invisibility cloak. All right, it's noticeable, it stands out, it draws attention. Not exactly what you'd wear for this long trip on a secret spy mission for Dad to see if your brothers were doing out there what they were supposed to be doing. Now, I'm guessing that perhaps Joseph thought it was important to show some sign of Dad's authority out here in the wilderness, some 65 to 75 miles from home. And that if the brothers didn't like him, perhaps he's thinking that this long coat is a reminder of his special status with Dad, and that would be like his secret weapon that would keep him safe. Or perhaps he was just being a punk and wanted to rub his brothers' faces in his special status one more time. I mean, that's all a guess. But what's not a guess is the effect that it had on Joseph's brothers here, so far from home, sort of like waving a red flag in front of a bull. I mean, sure seems that as the brothers see Joseph coming toward them in that special robe, that's the last straw. I mean, you can almost hear their thoughts, can't you? Here's that dreamer again, flaunting his position as Dad's favorite again. Those aren't travel clothes. Those are the "you're going to be the boss of the family one day" clothes that Dad gave him to wear. What's he doing wearing that stuff out here? Is he showing off again? Is he bragging again? Is he rubbing our noses in it again? Never should have happened in the first place, not at our expense. Who does he think he is? I am so tired of this stuff. And if we do something about it, well, who's going to stop us out here? There's 10 of us. There's one of him. And Joseph's a long way from home. Nobody's going to be riding out here to rescue him. And there's plenty of time in the long way home to come up with a story about what happened. This is our chance. Let's get him. Let's give him what he's had coming for a long, long time. Now, that's reading between the lines. But it's not too hard to picture, is it? Because we get tired of stuff too. We get tired of stuff too, and the longer it goes on, the more tired and angry we get. And when we see the opportunity to do something about it, well, we do it. Anger kept inside ultimately, inevitably boils over and leads to overreaction. And even though our overreaction might to us seem justified and some reasonable course of action, The truth is that overreaction just makes things worse. Check out this overreaction. Genesis 37:18-20. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Let's kill him? I mean, Joseph may have been a spoiled brat and a pompous you-know-what, but murder is a significant overreaction for slights and hurt feelings, wouldn't you say? Or this overreaction in the next couple verses. Verse 26, Judah asked his brothers, what will we gain by killing our brother and covering up his death? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's not hurt him because he's our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. Okay, don't kill him. Just sell him. Here they even convinced themselves they were being reasonable, not overreacting. Well, we're rid of him, which is what we want. And we didn't harm him ourselves because he's our brother after all, even if he is a snot. And, well, why can't we profit from it? Why shouldn't we profit from it? That's the least we deserve after the way we've been treated. And when he's gone, well, then one of us should be the future boss, right? Now, it seems like a reasonable solution to them to this ongoing problem. Really? Sell him into slavery? A hard life and probably an early grave just because they didn't like him and because he was rubbing their faces in the fact that he was the golden boy that dear old dad liked more than anybody else? Again, more overreaction. But that's what they did. And the results of them not controlling their anger were not pretty. Not pretty at all. They destroyed Joseph's life and felt kind of good about it. They destroyed their father's life, and maybe they felt some regret about that one, but the pain they caused their dad simply couldn't be undone. They put Joseph on a path that would cause him a lot of pain and suffering, and most of it undeserved. Follow the story through in the weeks ahead, and you'll see that there were times Joseph suffered and suffered a lot for doing what was right. And they had to live with the lie of the cover-up of what they've done, which holding on to that lie and living with it over time has a way of leading to the sort of guilt that eats away at you from the inside. No, the results of their overreaction aren't pretty. They're not pretty at all, just messy. And the pain went on for years. I mean, talk about a great big mess, which is pretty much where overreacting always ends up relationship-wise. I mean, just think about it. How many relationships has anger that's been stuffed and stoked and fueled till it boils over in some massive overreaction? How many relationships has that sort of anger destroyed? Well, plenty. I think that's because once you overreact, the action itself can't be undone. I mean, if they'd killed Joseph, he couldn't have been unkilled. And once they sold him, he wasn't going to be unsold. And once you overreact, it's also going to take a lot of work to clean it up. I mean, for example, how are they going to explain this to dear old dad and keep their story straight all these years ahead? And then once you overreact, it usually takes a lot of time to clean it up. And the truth is, sometimes some of that residual stain and pain is really never gone. I mean, check this out. Genesis 37, verse 35. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him. That's Jacob. But he refused to be comforted. He said, "No, I will mourn for my son until I die." Even their carefully constructed lie did nothing to ease their father's pain. which perhaps they should have known. But then again, overreacting in anger has never been known for clear, rational thought, has it? Overreacting in anger, it's just messy and painful, often for everybody involved, leaving a lot of broken pieces. And you probably know that because we have to deal with anger all the time too. We do live in an angry world after all. So here's the question I think that video clip raises. What can we do about all that anger? What can we do about the anger that's inside of us, just stewing and building and waiting to boil over and make a real mess of things? Well, first lesson, don't do what Jacob's brothers did. They are not good role models here. Instead, if, and I should say, and when you feel the anger rising in you to the point that it's starting to boil over and you sense some opportunity to dish out some retribution of your own, well, think about something a guy named Paul wrote to people in a church he'd started in a place called Ephesus. We pick it up in chapter 4 of his letter called Ephesians. Chapter 4, verse 26, he writes, "Be angry without sinning. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil any opportunity to work." Now, when he says be angry, he's acknowledging that anger is real, that our feelings are real. But when he says don't go to bed angry, he's saying deal with it. Don't ignore it. Don't just let it stew and build up like something beautiful is going to come out of it. It's not. Deal with it. Why? Because he says anger gives the devil an opportunity to work. And you certainly don't want to do that. The devil doesn't need any help. He doesn't need any assistance. And anger not dealt with appropriately will move into blowing up and boiling over and overreacting. And as we've already seen, that never leads to a good place. So how do we do what Paul's talking about here? How do you deal with anger appropriately? Well, for a deeper dive, go back on your own and read the whole chapter of Ephesians chapter 4. Read Matthew 18, 15 to 17. Here's the quick version. First, number 1, be patient. Be patient. Paul writes this, verse 2, "Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love." Now, making allowance there, he's saying, accept that the person that you're angry with has their own stuff that they're dealing with that's affecting their behavior. Another translation puts it, says, bear with each other, which means put up with stuff. And maybe you're saying, well, I don't want to put up with stuff. I don't want to put up with stuff. I shouldn't have to put up with stuff. And Paul says, well, maybe so. But do it anyway. Do it anyway, because remember, that's how Jesus treats you. Jesus puts up with all your stuff, so put up with stuff from other people. Not because the wrong is right, but he says patiently put up with stuff because of love. Because of love, because you love the other person, and because the love of Christ lives in you. Now that's challenging, isn't it? Patience is a virtue, but it doesn't come easy. It's just Christ-like. And so I'm thinking that if you want to be more patient with people and their stuff, you're going to have to, number 2, ask Jesus for help. All right? And you're going to have to pray to the Holy Spirit that he'd help that Christ-like patience grow in you. I mean, don't try to deal with your anger and frustration all alone. Ask God to help you. See, Jesus doesn't want your relationships to implode. Jesus doesn't want you to have to deal with all that mess when your anger boils over and you overreact. Now, if the mess comes, Jesus is going to help you deal with it, but Jesus would rather help you avoid it. So ask his help when you're feeling that anger's getting the best of you and it's starting to boil over. And then, number 3, don't bank your bitterness and think that something wonderful is going to grow out of that as a result. That's what Paul's getting at when he wrote this, verse 31. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Now, see, compound interest is a good thing where money's concerned, but not with bitterness. I mean, you keep it in, and it's just going to grow and grow and grow and grow until you blow. I mean, build up leads to blow up, and that's not pretty. It's just messy. So get rid of that bitterness that's getting the better of you. And then number 4, Paul's saying, ask forgiveness for yourself. Ask forgiveness first for yourself. Recognize that it's actually wrong to stoke your anger and to bank your bitterness and to look for opportunities to get back at the other person. Now, that may be natural. It may temporarily feel good. It may be the way of our angry world. But there's a better way. There's a better way. I mean, Jesus, God's favored Son, came to earth in order to rescue us from all the mess. And even though his own people hated him, Jesus willingly died for them in order to offer them both forgiveness and a fresh start. And a way through all that anger that you feel inside sometimes. And it wasn't just for them. Guys, there is no expiration date on what Jesus did on the cross. It was for us too. It's a way through the mess and a way to stop the messes from becoming even bigger with our overreactions. So when you feel that anger and bitterness, just you feel yourself holding on to that and you feel it rising up in you, remember, talk to God about it, not just asking him to help you deal with it and be more patient, but ask God for forgiveness. Forgiveness for yourself first. See, that's the fresh start for you. And then when you do that, then you're much more able to take the next step that's going to keep you from overreacting. And that next step is this. Forgive even if you don't feel like it. Forgive even if you don't feel like it. That's a big part about what Paul meant when he ended chapter 4 this way, verse 32. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Now, when you forgive, you're not saying that what the other person did or is doing is right. When you forgive, you're not saying that what the other person did or is doing doesn't hurt. When you forgive, you're not saying that what the other person did or is doing is okay. When you forgive, you're making a choice. You're making a choice to say, even though it's not okay, I'm not going to let that thing control me or make me overreact. You're making a choice to say, sometimes to the person directly, but often in the beginning, you're just saying this to yourself. You're making a choice to say, you know what, even though I'm angry, I'm going to forgive. I'm going to let it go so that it doesn't consume or destroy either one of us. When you forgive, you're making a conscious and a deliberate choice, well, to forgive and to move on, even though you'd rather blow up. And you're making a choice to forgive, well, as Paul said, because that's how Jesus treats your mistakes. And because if you follow Jesus, well, Jesus now lives in you and helps you be a little more like him. Now, if you follow the story through to the end of Genesis, you'll see that play out. I mean, you'll see that even though we sometimes give up on a situation, God never does. And God's always working. And that even when things stop working, God never stops working. And even when things get messed up badly by our overreacting, God's still working in Jesus to bring healing and reconciliation. And if you're in one of those places right now where you're kind of dealing with the fallout from a bunch of overreacting, well, you need to know that. You need to know that God is still with you and that God's still for you, and that in Jesus, God can make things new again. I mean, don't miss this point. God can clean up any mess that overreacting has caused. That's all possible because despite the fallout from these situations, God's still working and forgiving and wanting to give a fresh start. But as you follow this story through, in this story it took years, 20 or more probably, and it wasn't easy. And there were lots of pain and heartache and painful scars, even though things were forgiven that were never quite healed. There's a better way. A better way is to learn from Joseph's brothers what not to do and to follow God's direction for helping you rewrite your own story before overreacting gets the better of you.